Alright, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the second episode of Summoner's Strategies, where we examine strategies and tactics in League of Legends. Today's episode will also be a themed episode, like the last one, and today's topic will be focus fire and force concentration. Now, if you're not entirely certain what force concentration is, Wikipedia won't help you much on that topic. There's apparently a whole lot of math involved, and the formalization of it happened sometime during the First and Second World War, but what you need to know is that it is about placing more force where the opponent is weak. Now, this game is between the teams PPBB and Bamboo, and I cannot remember exactly what the full names of either were, sorry for that. On one team it's Anivia, Irelia, Nunu, Yavan and Kog'Maw. And the blue team has Ezreal, Sona, Riven, Amumu and Ryze. We will see that there is some of this early game invade play going on. Blue team didn't really check, or I guess they had no particular reason to check the bush. Both teams, when they start that early, usually expect that they will meet at the same time in the middle of the map. But in this case, blue team probably should not be so brave, considering how two of their players are still back at the base. Ryze almost gets caught out in the bush for some reason. I'm assuming that he stood there and thought that he could see the enemy coming in time. Although Javan apparently started with no skill yet. That's a little strange. He could start with his spear jab thing that pulls him to the enemy to catch someone standing in the bush by just blind firing it like that, but well, in this case it just sort of ended up in a little show of force and scared the blue team away. Blue team maybe thinks that they are over here because of the ping, but either way, blue team is one man short and should not engage in these kinds of attacks. The Ezreal player is incredibly brave, moving up toward that spot before the golem spawns, so there's no chance that the enemy is going to be fighting the golem there. They may be in the bush, which makes it very dangerous to go up there, but things worked out just fine. Now, the early game here isn't particularly spectacular. There's not a whole lot going on here. The lanes establish themselves, the jungler gets the help. The jungler on blue team also gets help, and Manunu gets help killing the red buff. Now, today's topic of force concentration is one that is incredibly important to learn, because once you sort of master how that works, you pretty much no longer need to worry about champions or items all that much. It's one of the core elements of League of Legends gameplay on a higher level. It's a very basic topic, in fact. It's definitely something that everyone should... I'm also noticing that the sound is a little low here. That's strange, not sure why that is, but oh well. Now, actually wonder how that works, but either way. Actually, let me pause here for a moment. Right, sorry about that. There should be a short cut there, but you should not have to care that much. Nothing much happened in the meanwhile. Actually, let's go back for a few moments, because we first need to introduce this topic a little bit more. The topic of force concentration. What is it? Well, specifically, force concentration is what will determine how well you do in League of Legends. In practical terms, you can think of it as the concept: if you have more champions in a fight than your enemy, then you will win. And once you sort of think about that, it opens up so many wonderful gameplay strategies, because you no longer have to care all that much about what your item build is or exactly how many creep score you're getting. It becomes more about maneuvering. For example, here there's a 2 versus 2 and purple team sees that Amumu is coming up there, and that's a really nice stun by Anivia. So what happened here was that we saw Amumu come here and not expect that Javan is in the brush, but because he was there, he could gain vision on Amumu, and Anivia could move down to help, well, basically help attack Amumu. So it was a bit of an ambush there, but what exactly happened from a forced concentration standpoint is that Javan and Anivia at the same time attacked Amumu while Rice was too far away to really help. And when Rice moved up to support Amumu, well, it was sort of too late already. Anivia got this wonderful position to stun both of them, and they took down Amumu. What we basically take from this is that two players teamed up on one, and that one player died. Very simple. Now, here we see Javan moving down for another gank on bottom lane, and bottom sort of realizes what's happening. They're retreating in good time, actually. But Sona gets pretty much picked down. Just the ward wasn't high enough, maybe, or maybe bot should have realized that Javan was moving down. It's difficult to point fingers on any particular person. Maybe it was just bad luck this particular time. Does Sona have boots yet? Sona does not have boots. Of course, you can't exactly expect a full-on support to have boots at the 5-minute mark, but that can also be just a helpful advice for a jungler. Try to gank bottom lane before the support gets boots. If you bring 3 players against 2 at the bottom, the 2 players are going to lose. Now, this just is sort of very simple strategy. There we see a draw between purple and blue top lane, and purple top lane, well, didn't die this particular time, but maybe that was for the better. I think Riven could have ensured that Irelia died if she had stayed longer and fought, and then it would have become a trade, 1 kill for 1 kill, so maybe this was for the better. Irelia is sort of lured to back away while Riven gets a few moments of freeform. On the bottom lane, it's the typical sort of laning going on. It goes back and forth. At one point we saw blue team at the bottom turret, and at one point we saw purple team at the top turret. Now blue team gets very aggressive, and purple sort of... well, actually purple had a ward there. They realized that the enemy was coming and actually manages to flee quite nicely there. That just wasn't much of a surprise for the purple team. That was a very interesting ward placement actually. Usually the wards are played somewhere in the river to see someone coming down there. It's interesting to see a jungler try to take this path. It's a very aggressive path to attack from. Now we see that Kog'Maw is alone against 2 players on the bottom, and yes, that pretty much gives bottom lane free access to anything they want in the bottom lane. Up here we see that Javan came up to gank and got a bit of brawling against Riven. Irelia doesn't really notice it fast enough, but Riven probably would have survived anyway. Both champions are very tanky, very brawly. Anivia has apparently been chased back quite a couple of times, although Anivia has better creep score than Rice does. But Rice is very aggressive with his poking magic attacks. Anivia pretty much needs to land that Q before level 6 to be able to do proper harassment damage. So that makes him not as dangerous early on. Now here's an interesting fight going on. Now you don't actually need to care much at all about what the maneuvers there were. The important points from a forced concentration standpoint is this. 3 players versus 2. It's just by that alone we can determine that blue team was going to win this fight. Because what has been happening in this game so far is that both teams are very even. Now we can assume that they are playing maybe not on a professional level, but they are not playing at an amateur level. They are both quite good teams. That was a bit of a stupid mistake there. The fight was basically over before Amumu could join in on it, so it was sort of a 1 versus 1 fight in that Amumu could not influence the battle in any way. He didn't have anything to attack Anivia with at that range. Down here something happened. Purple team killed off Sona. Let's actually go back and see how that happened. It might be interesting to see. The thing is, if your enemy and you are basically equal in strength and items, which is the fight we just saw happen, if you are equal, sometimes you will die because you don't know the enemy. What I mean by this is that, well, here Sona basically got caught way out of position and just slowed down horribly by the enemy. Just bad positioning, bad maneuvering. Sun Tzu says, I know, isn't that wonderfully presumptuous quoting Sun Tzu, but it is quite apt for this situation. It is apt for any game, in fact. Paraphrased a little, and it's obviously not in the original Chinese, but what he says is something along the lines of, if you know yourself, you will win 100 battles. If you know yourself and your enemy, then you need not fear the outcome of any battle. Something along those lines. And what it comes down to is, if you know what your enemy can do, and you know what you yourself can do, you don't need to fear any battle. And this is very true in the laning phase. If a player realizes that an enemy is stronger than him, he's not going to be aggressive in the lane. Like any pro tournament you see this happen, the weaker champion, the weaker player won't take as many risks and he will try to avoid getting killed. While in amateur games what you may see is that a player just doesn't realize that he's outmatched and goes very aggressive and attacks the enemy and gets just shut down in a 1 versus 1 fight. Or maybe he doesn't realize how the enemy's abilities work. For example, Ezreal has a lot of skill shots, so maybe an amateur player wouldn't hide behind the minions, he doesn't realize that. If you don't know what your enemy can do, it becomes a bit of a gamble to fight, because maybe you are stronger than him, but maybe you are not. Here we see just typical force concentration go on again. 3 players versus 2, the 2 players lose. Because in this case, barely misses with that ultimate. Good shot though, very good shot, just barely misses. In this fight, what we see is that both teams realize what each other's capabilities are. They do not take a lot of stupid risks. There's a few judgment calls that are wrong, like Ryze attacking because he thought that Amumu was close enough to help against Anivia in the team fight that occurred here. But generally what we see is that no team just flat out loses in the laning phase 1 versus 1, because they don't take a lot of stupid risks and they attack when they can, but they don't overextend particularly, except maybe the Sona down there, not quite sure what that was. Sona seems to be the weakest player in this team setup on both teams, because Sona is the only one who dies in a straight up laning phase. Everyone else sort of knows their capabilities and respects the capabilities of their enemy. So what do you do when this kind of stalemate occurs? Then you basically have to play according to force concentration rules. Ryze should have kept running. In this case he thought that he could take down Anivia in time. He underestimated the enemy's strength, he sort of didn't know his capabilities. That's sort of the gist of the whole know yourself, know your enemy principle of Sun Tzu's Art of War. If you know that you're going to lose a fight, don't fight. In that case, Ryze stayed and fought a bit too long. He had his flash up, he could have flashed over the wall there and escaped. There was just no point for him to stay and fight there. He thought that he could win, but he couldn't. Okay, have I hammered that point in hard enough now? I'm going to stop on that one topic now. Point is, when you have this sort of stalemate and both teams will not die to the stupid mistakes, what wins the team fights is force concentration. You simply make sure that you always have more players than the enemy does. Now down here we see 2 blue team players coming down to attack the purple, and Sona wonderfully does that ultimate to keep them in place, and then Amumu comes down and uses his ultimate. And you could say that this fight was a fight of abilities, like those wonderful large crowd control abilities that kept them in place, but really what we see is that an opportunity arose where 4 players fought against 2 players. Of course the 4 players are going to win. Basically, that's the gist of forced concentration. It is what determines team fights, well, maybe not even team fights, just fights in general with two equal opponents. Now, here we see 3 blue players against 2 purple, but what happened there? It seems strange because, well, Sona died. You know, she was in the team with 3 players. She should not have died, but actually, yes, she should. Again, forced concentration and focus fire comes into play here.
Your team's turret has been destroyed.
Did I hop down too far? Sorry about that. Well, also important to note is this ward placement. It is very interesting. Purple team can see blue team and well, blue team can see themselves. Not very surprising there. What happens here is that actually I really like this strategy. Jarvan sort of does this maneuvering thing and Jarvan essentially lures these 2 players away and leaves Sona alone with Anivia. Anivia at this point is essentially the strongest damage dealing champion they have, because yes, Kog'Maw is a strong AD carry, but he does not have all his proper AD carry items up yet and he's not in the fight. Anivia is really dangerous on the purple team, and just one-on-one against Sona, this doesn't require forced concentration theory. It's a level 11 mage caster against a level 6 support. So, and what happens here is that again, 2 players against 1, Jarvan. The 1 player loses. So it's a 1-for-1 exchange. It was a bit of a divide and I'm not going to say conquer strategy because I don't think it was a very good decision. Purple team ultimately lost in this fight because I don't think they got as much gold for a level 6 Sona who was already racked up a couple of deaths as blue team got from killing Jarvan, who was basically the big ganker on the purple team, was given purple team a lot of kills already. A lot of those kills have been because Jarvan has been ganking very nicely from the jungle. So, yeah, if you know yourself and you know your enemy, you're not going to lose to them, because you're not going to allow yourself to be killed. You're going to know, can the enemy kill me? If he can, I'm not going to go near him and let him do that. So you have to rely on team fights. Now here Anivia comes down, which is lovely. Sona just places that ward at the exact right time to flee. Maybe if the wall had been level 2, I think it's level 1, that looked like a level 1 wall. Yes, if it had been a level 2 wall, Sona might have died again. Trapped there, stunned, purple team could have come up and killed them. Nice gank attempt. Anivia realized that it wasn't working out and fled, and that's perfectly fine. If you notice this isn't working, they know where I am, you're not going to surprise them anymore, just go back, do something else. Jarvan gives Anivia the blue buff, which is very kind, keeps Anivia very dangerous. Although the laning phase is sort of ending at this point. We see that it's about 15 minutes in the game and that mid turret has been taken. That's about when the laning phase starts to stop. And we sort of see this start to happen because the teams are essentially congealing here into groups. We see that they're sort of moving together in these clusters, and that's usually how you can tell that the mid-game phase is starting. The laning phase is sort of ending except for the tops, which are in a contest of who can farm the most. That's basically what these 2 players are going to do. They're going to keep on farming until late game they suddenly get an enormous burst of power and lane team fight presence, not laning presence. Again, Irelia knew when to back off, knew that Riven was doing too much damage and didn't die. This Irelia player knows what the Riven is capable of and vice versa. You know, it's not a very surprising top lane. There's no amazing surprises that happens there. They're not going to kill each other a lot. Now, one thing that I do want to note is the turret here. That was very stupid by Riven, because maybe Riven just didn't realize that the turret was there. Maybe that happened. Now here's 2 blue players attacking 1 purple player. We sort of know what happens when you do that. Purple player has to flee. In conventional forced concentration theory, there's a whole lot of math. There's actually a lot of math about it. something about if you have 2 units against 1 unit, there's a certain factor of multiple force powers. I actually don't know the math exactly, and I don't know if it's exactly applicable either, but one of the things that force concentration states is that a person, or rather an army or a force, that's actually a much better word, a force that is on the defensive can hold off an attacking force 3 times larger. And I actually do believe that this applies to League of Legends, in that the only real place where you can be defensive is at the turret. Can 1 player hold off 3 enemies at the turret? It's very difficult, but I do think it can be done. 1 player with a turret against 2 players, of course, that's very easy actually. Just imagine no minions, just say Anivia at the turret and 3 enemies, and let's say that they are equal at level 6. Anivia can probably keep them away, or at least if they try to tower dive Anivia, he can probably kill 2 of them, maybe all 3. Of course Anivia has the egg, but take Riven there or Irelia, just anyone. The tower essentially gives you another player, so if you're so die-hard that you start thinking about force concentration as a proper strategy to the point where you base your team composition around it, which you should. A lot of the pro players do that. You can see it in any tournament. Consider the turret to be a player. A player and a half at low levels, a player at the mid game, and a very weak player very late game. So if you have 3 players attacking 3 players and there's a turret involved, that essentially adds another player. So when you're looking at certain fights near turrets, you have to keep that in mind. It's not an equal player by player comparison anymore. There is no blue ward there, but he still plays very careful. He suspects that there may be someone there. Here we see another 2 versus 2 happening. Sona gets isolated and picked on by Anivia. Kog'Maw, yeah, that's just 3 against 1 surrounded. Sona had no chance. Sona still does not have boots. Sona is clearly the weak player in this matchup, that is the fact. This Sona doesn't seem to realize how incredibly important that movement speed is. Sona keeps getting caught because he's playing a very slow character. The enemy is just catching up to him too fast, slowing him down. He needs movement speed. He really does need movement speed in this game, and he has been giving the enemy a lot of kills. So at the moment, what the score here is, because, well, okay, we can see the score. We can see that Purple Team has more kills, and a lot of it is due because of the early kills by Sona, but as the game progresses, those kills are going to be less important. They're going to not give as much gold. So it's no longer as much about gold when killing Sona as it is about removing what Sona brings to the field, which is that wonderful ultimate that can horribly change a team fight. This Sona is very underleveled, very bad. It seems that Amumu... For a moment I thought that Amumu was going to give Sona the creep form there for some gold, which I think would have been a good idea, because Sona does need to shore up her defenses in this case. Now, it's all well and good to just sort of say in theory that, use proper force concentration rules, just attack where the enemy is weak and attack with a superior force. That's sort of the basics. We see this happening here in the mid game, in that both teams are starting to move in these large groups, because, well, they do not want to be the weaker side of the exchange. They want to be the stronger force attacking the weaker one. So it's always best, or okay, it's not the best, but it's always the safest to have all your players in one place. It's not always strategically sound, but it makes you the least likely to be attacked by a stronger force in that. you're not always going to be stronger or equal if you have all your players in one spot. That's sort of a given. I'm not trying to insult anyone's intelligence here, I'm just sort of restating these obvious facts, partly for my own sake. This whole medium is a way for me to sort of get some of these thoughts out, not on paper in this case, but on video, it seems. Now, yeah, there's some movement around. They are sort of hoping to just catch the other team unaware, but it doesn't really happen a lot. Both teams are just good teams. They are both playing very nicely here. They don't get horribly caught out of position, they ward when they can, they sort of have an understanding of where the enemy is even when they don't see it. Both teams play very well here. So what do you do in the mid and late game phase when both teams are moving in these groups and you can't really easily get one or two isolated players and put overwhelming force on them? That's when the difficult team fight phase has to start. Now, you can do that which just happened there, which is a catch. If you see, or you sort of try to lure one enemy away from the group and then try to use catching abilities to kill him, you know, that can happen. A particular favorite style of doing that is with Blitzcrank, because he can just force one enemy out and just splat him immediately. Another happens when it comes to just the chaos of battle, what we will see in this fight, if I remember correctly. Jarvan thought that was a good time to initiate. It wasn't. Gets just melted down immediately. So, yeah, on the surface this seems to be a very chaotic battle, and yes, it is a very chaotic battle. There's a lot of people who die, there's a lot of wounds.
Shut down.
3 for 3, it was a equal exchange. Purple team is still much in the lead with just, what is that, 8,000 gold, lots of gold. Anivia's a bit brave there, but Sona has no mana, so that's safe enough. Yeah, that was an interesting team fight, very chaotic. Let's head back a moment and see what happened exactly. And for the topic, which is forced concentration, let's keep that in mind as we see what happens. Did I go too far? Or no. I must have gone way too far. I'm not sure what happened there. Oh dear, now I completely lost my position here. How awkward. Did I go too far? Okay, you know what? I want to see that team fight again. Oh, there it is. I went too far. Sorry about that. So, yes, the team fight here. When you no longer can bring the principles of forced concentration to bear, you can no longer sort of bring two players on one, because neither team allows it. You sort of have to move over onto focus fire, which is like a more localized forced concentration. It's essentially the same principle, but it's less about having more troops than the enemy, and it's more about where they attack. So focus fire is where we move on to now. Let's slow this down a little so we can properly see what happens in this team fight. Well, both teams are gathered together. The positioning on purple is a bit not as good in my opinion. You'd want Kog'Maw a bit back. You don't want Irelia is up here for some reason. That's already a very bad thing. Because we see now that it's unless Irelia can... What's the move called? Sorry, Blade Surge? No. Yes, Blade Surge. Unless Irelia can Blade Surge onto an enemy, he has to move all this way up, down there to go into the attack. So, for a moment, this is essentially a 4 versus 5. The blue team has the advantage. And then Jarvan... I mean, maybe the purple team thought that they could do this ambush thing where blue team overextends and then the purple team attacks from the back. But what happens is that Jarvan seems to call this way too soon and just initiates.
I am
We can see very clearly that this is a 5 versus 1 right now. Jarvan has just no chance in hell to win this fight, so Purple Team very quickly has to move in to help. Riven sees this as an opportunity to attack and do some damage there, while the rest of the blue team seems to have been intimidated and runs away. That was very... well, they start retreating. It seems to be a lack of communication here. So now it's Riven against 3 enemies and 2 purple team against 4 blue. And of course they attack Sona because, hey, Sona has the least health, looks like an easy target. Amumu realizes that Riven needs help and tries to go down and help them, but that just turns this into a 3 versus 2, and, well, this fight was already over. So now it's Amumu versus 3 purple, and blue team caught there and can't chase after Jarvan, so they were just out of the fight. And 3 versus 1, what's going to happen? Well, the 3 players are going to win. So you sort of see what happened there. It's very basic force concentration and fire focus still. It's more players defeat less players. And what happens is that both teams maneuver either correctly or incorrectly at times and just place themselves in bad positions. Sometimes it can be done correctly, like maybe if Amumu had occupied 3 players while blue team just killed like the rest of them. Well, that didn't happen in this case because the other team was doing essentially the same thing. Both teams placed a brawler / tank inside the enemy cluster and just sort of tried to kill targets of opportunity. But what happened in that case is that, well, you have 1 player surrounded by the entire enemy team. Yes, it's a distraction, but it's only because they have to kill that 1 player. There's no discussion about it. Sansu says something about trapping as well. Or maybe it was Miyamoto Musashi. I'm not exactly certain who said it. I believe it may have been both. And it's on the topic of traps. And what that comes down to is that if you want to trap your enemy, you have to bait him. And the way to successfully bait your enemy, according to Sun Tzu and Miyamoto Musashi, is you have to offer him something that he cannot refuse to take. And in this case, placing 1 player inside the big blob of all the enemies, they have to take that player, they have to attack him. It's one way to bait, but I'm not certain if it's a way to trap. You also have to have the next part of the plan in place. When they are busy killing that 1 player, what are you going to do? Well, in this case both teams seem to do the same trap on each other, and that just ended up in a messy cluster. You saw how much we had to pause, or not pause, but slow down the game to see what was happening properly, and to properly analyze it. I don't think a lot of players are able to do all that analysis while the fight is happening. It was 20 seconds of skirmish from start to finish, something like that. I don't think a lot of players would be able to properly calculate how they should change their tactics and strategies and maneuvers, so miscommunication is bound to happen. That's why a lot of teams want to have something like Amumu and Sona on 1 team, because then the team fight becomes all about land this 1 ability that incapacitates your enemy, and you have enough moments to just focus fire 1 or 2 of them, and then it's a 3 versus 5 and you're going to win just by basic force concentration. It's very simple. It's very convenient to have that type of team that just relies on this 1 setup that then allows them to win team fights. Someone is happy, I hear. I'm going to pause for a moment and make a quick cut here.